same thing. Alright, so if we just want to introduce what our topics are ourselves.
So, our topic is religion from an objective perspective, looking at it from the view of kind of a definition, or like a few different definitions, the history behind it and its development through history, and then a few anthropological theories behind religion.
Yep. And I chose to focus on the history of religion.
And I chose to focus more on some of the different definitions and theories that anthropologists and sociologists have made. So, getting into some of the definitions, there's, in the US, religion actually generally refers to the belief in a distinct form of faith, like, especially, like Western religion, like Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. It's not really a universally recognized idea, though. Many cultures don't actually have a word for religion, and many societies don't make distinctions between their beliefs or practices that are religious versus spiritual and other habits of their everyday life.
Interesting.
Yeah. Like an example of a definition would be from Sir E.B. Tyler, in which place he defined it simply as a belief in supernatural beings in an attempt to kind of encompass what everybody thinks religion is, but that's a really broad term, actually, to say belief in supernatural beings. Like, what exactly are you talking about when you say that compared to something else, you know?
Thing I think of when I hear the word supernatural, I think of like a ghost or something. Like,
yeah, it's like,
I don't think of like a deity.
Yeah, it's really broad. So, there's another definition based off of the definition by Sir E.B. Tyler, was from sociologist Emil Durkheim, in which place he recognized that it's not just like belief in supernatural beings, but rather it's a set of practices and social institutions that brought members of a community together, sometimes centered around the belief in supernatural beings.
Yeah.
I believe he said it was a unified system of beliefs and practices relative to sacred things, that is to say, things set aside and forbidden, beliefs and practices which unite into one single moral community called a church, all those who adhere to them. So again, focusing more kind of on that Western idea of religion.
Yeah.
And then Google, when I looked,
good old Google,
everyone looks at Google for definitions, said, and I quote, the belief in and worship of a superhuman power or powers, especially a god or gods. Or
interesting.
A particular system of faith and worship.
Okay, so again, seems a little more westernized definition.
Yeah. It does incorporate a bit of, like, polytheism, in which place belief in more than one god, but again, it doesn't encompass everything, you know?
Yeah. Interesting to note.
Yeah. It's also interesting to think of how religion is oftentimes directly related to magic. Like, it seems a bit weird to think about, considering the fact that when you think of magic, you think kind of like Harry Potter and spells and all that crazy stuff, right? But when you think of it, there's actually a lot of like magic behind religion, you know? Like in the Bible and the Christian religion, when I'm gonna get the name wrong because I haven't read the Bible in a long time, but when the person parts the seas, is that Moses? No, that wasn't Moses. It was Moses?
I think it was Moses.
When he parts the seas, that's an instance in which place it's very supernatural, kind of magical. You know? Or when like a bush is magically lit on fire by something that isn't there. Well, I mean, depending on how you look at it, might be someone there, but, you know?
Yeah, I get what you mean.
Yeah. But again, these definitions kind of don't all encompass everything, you know? Like, there's
Yeah.
some religions that are very, they don't incorporate God or gods, you know? Like, I'm pretty sure, like, Buddhism is one of them, if I
Mhm.
double check. And that's a fairly popular one, but that one is more based off of morals and stuff as opposed to, like, a
Yes.
god.
Yeah.
And before we get into kind of the history aspect of it, I'd like to just clarify really quick that this isn't saying that one thing is correct or incorrect. It's all just, this is something that people have studied a lot because of how important it is to many people's lives on Earth.
Mhm.
So, you know, take the information with what you will.
Yeah, that's pretty much how it goes in general. Alright. Well, shall we move along to our different little sections then?
Yeah. So you talked
Okay.
about the history, right?
Yes, so I'm focusing on the history. And I read a couple articles. I looked on Google Scholar for a couple articles. There was this one book um, by Trevor Ling. And it's generally about the history of religion in the East and the West. And I basically just skimmed through it. And in general, in early times, so like before what we consider as modern times, religion was a means to explain life or like to keep going on with life.
Yeah.
Like let's say it's like a time where there's a flood or something, and people are like, "What happened? What's going on?" Like you can, uh, people in power or leaders can say like, "Hey, it was because so and so happened. Let's make sure we're like better people next year," or something like that. Also, there was a lot of general hostility towards differences and different religions. A lot of religious conflicts happened back then. Um, I still think that happens to a degree now, but it's definitely less violent.
Yeah.
Um, and then moving on to like during COVID, of course, large gatherings and worships had to be moved online or just were canceled altogether. Um, and some of that did not happen because certain religious communities did not listen to health professionals. They're like, oh, that's not true. They're lying to us, whatever. And a lot of people got sick because of that. Um, but I guess that like proved it more to them that they're like this was a time where they needed to stick together. It was a little interesting to read the couple articles I did.
Yeah.
But
Religion.
mostly it shows that during especially COVID times and I guess hardship in general that faith is relied on as a means to get through hard times still.
Yeah.
Um and then something in general I found was that there is like a discrimination between men and women who practice religion. So apparently men are allowed to do whatever they want. But women are supposed to like follow certain guidelines like specifically. And it's like interesting. Hmm.
Yeah, there's some religions where that's way more prominent than others, which is very
Yes.
interesting.
That is very interesting. That's generally what I found.
Alright. So, before we touch on some of the different anthropological theories, let's talk about the different elements of religion and things that have kind of been found by some people to exist in the majority of the religions, like kind of across the board. It's of course not exact because there are like some follow with like they like 3 elements will show up but not the full 4, or like 2 will show up but not the full 4. It just, you know, is a kind of general consensus between most of them, but again, it's not exact. So,
Okay.
the first one is cosmology, which is kind of how the universe is formed, or like the history of the universe. Again, like you talked about, it's kind of explaining how things came to be. Like, an explanation for like this thing that seems impossible, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Then there's also the belief in supernatural, like we talked about earlier with Sir E.B. Tyler's definition, which is a realm beyond the human experience. And this is where you kind of include your god or gods, but it's of course not required necessarily in the belief of supernatural to include those things. Then you'd have different rules that govern your behavior. They kind of define proper conduct for the individuals in society that partake in this religion. So like the 10 Commandments in Christianity, don't kill your neighbor and stuff. Then there's also ritual, in which place they have practices of ceremonies that serve a religious purposes. This can be oriented towards the supernatural, but it can also address the needs of individuals or communities as a whole. One example of this is kind of funeral rituals. They're often designed to ensure passage into the afterlife, but they also kind of provide an emotional comfort for those who are grieving and provide an outlet for the community to express support. So those are the 4 big things that people have found in terms of religion, which is cosmology, belief in the supernatural, rules governing behavior, and ritual. Just a quick overview.
Yeah.
And then let's jump into some theories. So, first of all, let's talk about... Ooh, I'm probably going to get this guy's name wrong. I'm sorry about that. In 1931, Bronislaw Malinowski, we'll put that on the screen, a nice little name.
We'll write that out of the screen.
He believed that religious beliefs met psychological needs. Again, kind of those funeral rituals, that kind of example. He observed that religion is not born out of speculation or reflection, still less out of illusion or apprehension, but rather out of the real tragedies of human life, out of the conflict between human plans and realities. He did his research on the Shorbreand Islanders, and they have an event called the Kula Ring, in which place men built canoes and sailed on long and dangerous journeys, and before these trips, several rituals were performed, even though when they go on like typical fishing trips, they wouldn't like do all these rituals. He concluded that based on what he saw, these people found these trips to be more dangerous and more anxiety-inducing, so these religious rituals that they practiced beforehand provided a way to reduce or control anxiety and uncertainty. Which is, again, especially if we look at like COVID times, you can kind of see this when some people dove more into their religion as a way of like trying to convince themselves that it was okay, we'll be okay.
Yeah.
So he was a functionalist, and he believed religion provided shared value and behavioral norms that created solidarity between people. This kind of files into what Emile Durkheim, who again had a definition earlier of religion, and it was the shared perspective of religion building connections between people, but by creating definition of sacred and profane items. So, sacred items or ideas were treated with general respect or care, which is again your kind of gods, natural phenomenon, animals, etc., whereas profane objects and ideas were treated more with disregard and contempt. So, Durkheim believed that celebrating it through ritual was a powerful way to unite communities around shared values. And in addition, celebrating the sacred can create an intense emotional experience, which Durkheim referred to as a collective passion or energy that arises when groups of people share the same thoughts and emotions. So kind of this connecting experience. This experience of kind of collective like passion or energy magnifies the emotional impact of an event and can create a sense of wonder or awe. So it's like bringing people together. That's essentially through like objects or values, Then we have Dame Mary Douglas, who again continued exploration into sacred and profane structure of religious beliefs, but she focused more on the cultural ideas of things that were dirty or impure, which is kind of vague, but that's about where it stopped with the information about her. Then, kind of a famous name, at least for some people, would be philosopher and historian Karl Marx. He is famous for calling religion the opium of the people, and he viewed it as an ideology, as a way of thinking to justify inequalities in power and status, which, I mean, based on his other works, I'm sure this is not that surprising.
Yeah.
He viewed the church, specifically the Christian church, as something that helped kind of legitimize and support the political and economic difficulties of life under capitalism. Again, I'm sure it's real shocking based on what he did before, or after this maybe. He kind of also focused on the idea of an afterlife, again, specifically in the working class people, and how it encouraged them to look for this idea of what comes after life, and like to not fight for anything else. Instead, you should fight to get there. But he was one of the main people that focused on like the systems based on the worship of a particular animal or object, and suggested that the purpose of this was to regulate interactions with socially significant and potentially disruptive objects and relationships. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it kind of does.
Yeah. And then in
No.
1974, Marvin Harris kind of combined the ideas of Durkheim, Marx, and Freud's interpretation of religion to analyze the Hindu prohibition against killing cows. He suggests that the religious ideas about cows is actually based on economic reality, which, I mean, feels like it's a common theme amongst a lot of anthropologists in looking at religion, is that it relates heavily to like what's going on in the world, especially economically. But in
So,
Hindu, cows are more valuable alive as a source of milk for doing work than in the fields as they are dead as meat. So they're also viewed as like innocent and pure, which is another reason why.
yeah.
Then we have Clifford Geertz. Probably said his name wrong as well. He is one of the anthropologists responsible for the creation of the symbolic approach to religion. And he defined religion, here's another definition, as a system of symbols which acts to establish powerful, persuasive, and long-lasting moods and motivations by formulating conceptions of a general order of existence and clothing these misconceptions with an aura of factuality that the moods and motivations seem uniquely realistic. So, he suggested that religious practices were a way to enact or make visible important cultural ideas. He had kind of symbols, which were like, for an example, again going back to Christianity, the cross. It symbolized death and resurrection, but also sacrifice and putting others above you. This kind of symbolic approach treats religion as a text or performance to be interpreted by outsiders, as opposed to like a reality. So it's like giving the morals of these kind of ideas, you know?
Yeah.
So it's like in English class when they would have you read a story and they were like, what's the theme behind this? That's essentially what the symbolic approach was.
Yeah.
So, overall, kind of just to wrap things up, religion has been really important to many people in their lives in the majority of cultures. In fact, 8 in 10 people in the world have been said to be affiliated with a religion. Of course, this number of people who affiliate themselves with religion is actually decreasing. So, like, more and more younger people are saying that they are not religious than they did in the past. We actually saw this in our research project. When we offered up a survey to a lot of people around our age and asked if, like, a few questions, like, especially, are you religious and are your parents religious? So,
Of the like, I think it was like between 50 and 60
62.
people that, 62 people that answered our survey. Like 4 or 5 of them answered yes to the question, are you religious?
yes.
And that clearly shows a trend that, especially among younger people, there's a decreasing willingness to participate in organized religion. You can see from this graph that that's the case.
Yes. I believe
A lot of the people who said no said, oh, my parents practice religion, but they're not super serious, or oh, my parents do, but I don't, or I just go to church with them, but I don't, like, go to Bible study or something like that.
Yeah, out of the 62, there were 8 people who said that they were religious, and about 3 of them said that they were spiritual and not religious, because this is especially shows that in Western culture, identifying with a religion means that you identify with, like, a specific kind of belief system, like Christianity, Islam, Judaism, those ones, whereas in other places in the world, they just see being spiritual and being religious as essentially the same thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay, I guess I miscounted.
Yeah, no, that's all good. And then, out of the people who responded to whether your parents are religious, it was about a 50-50. So, there's clearly evidence that it's going down. Yeah, which, I mean, again, this was not a wide-scale survey. 62 responses is pretty good, but it is not everybody, if that makes sense. But this really goes to show that religions, like culture, are highly dynamic and they're subject to the constant changes both in interpretation and allegiance. And so it's just like, it's always going to change. In the future, it might go up again. It might continue to go down. I feel like there's been waves throughout history of the amount of people that consider themselves to be religious based on the times. Overall, there's no single set of theories or definitions or vocabulary that can completely capture religious diversity that exists in the world today, but there have been numerous attempts at examples of definitions and of different theories that hope to explain it. But again, there's no real way to define everything, and sometimes it doesn't entirely need to be defined. It is a thing that is there, and though a definition would be nice, it's not entirely necessary.
exactly. And a couple of people in the survey especially said that one of the reasons why they don't agree with organized religion is because religion seems to have become more political
Yes.
and more weaponized in the increasing years. And that's something they don't agree with. They agree with like moral teachings and stuff like that, but they don't agree that it should be used to justify harm.
Yes, so it's like not even just the belief anymore. It's
Yeah.
how does this affect how I'm living? And if it's not helping me, then why should I believe in it? You know?
Exactly.
Alright, so that concludes our topic on religion from an objective perspective. It's not all encompassing. This is a wide topic that some people dedicate their entire life to studying. But
Exactly. And I'm sure we could go around to like many colleges and universities and get many people's opinions, and it differ from region to region, but
yeah,
that would take a while.
yeah. So it's a brief overview into the topic, and I hope that you found it interesting.
Yeah. Thanks for listening.